and this goes way deep. This is talking about maybe in some odd way we were predisposed to do this, and that everything in my life up until that point made it such that I was ready to actually embark on this rather very different way of kind of standing up for what I believe in and illuminating the importance of the natural world, because it's been my teacher for decades.
Amidst the COVID pandemic's global shutdown, climate scientists were forced to stop on-site work in polar regions. Enter my remarkable guest, Sunniva Sorby, CEO and co-founder of Hearts in the Ice. This organization highlights climate change dialogue and social engagement, particularly in the polar regions. Sunniva and her co-founder Hilde Fålun Strøm continued their vital work as citizen scientists, living and working 19 months in a remote Arctic trapper's cabin. In addition to no heat and no running water, other challenges included polar bear encounters, epic snowstorms, and months of total, all-encompassing darkness. They continued on drilling ice samples, kayaking in icy waters, gathering phytoplankton. They documented wildlife, clouds, and the northern lights. They did drone mapping and so much more for 8 international research projects. Sunniva's lifetime adventuring culminated in her becoming a citizen scientist. Decades ago, she was part of the first all-women team to ski to the South Pole, enduring extreme conditions like minus 60-degree temperatures over 67 days. That history-making 1993 expedition led to many more feats, including climbing Mount Kilimanjaro 5 times, leading expeditions throughout Patagonia, and leading scores of Antarctic trips. Her unique perspective on climate change is both powerful and captivating. So please take a moment to subscribe, share this episode with your community, and dive into this engaging conversation with Sunniva Sorby. Greetings, Sunniva Sorby. How are you?
Hello, good day, Deborah. I'm doing very well, thanks.
Good. It's
happy to be on the call with you.
Thank you for being on the call with me. First of all, I want to make sure that I'm pronouncing your name correctly because I've heard it pronounced a couple different ways. Can you say it for me?
Sunniva.
Sunniva.
It's a good Norwegian name.
Yes. So you're not born in Norway, right? You're born in Canada?
I was born in Norway.
Oh, okay.
To Norwegian parents, and they immigrated to Canada when I was just a year old.
I see. So this explains some of what we'll talk about today, your many, many years living in very, very cold temperatures. And
absolutely.
Yeah, you've got that good sturdy stock. Well, anyway, so welcome. I'm happy to have you on this very special show, How We Change the World. You are one of those rare individuals who is not only proposing that we all take some responsibility for our world, but that you are out there on the front lines every single day doing it. And I want to celebrate you for that and hear about, some advice that you might be able to share with all of us too.
Thank you for acknowledging that. I really appreciate it. We need people like yourself and people like me multiplied times thousands.
Yes. We want people to start listening and acting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, there's about 100 threads in your life story that I want to pull on and learn more about. You've had a very adventurous and very, action-packed life, which has become, over the years, I guess, has sort of evolved into taking action for the earth. I don't think it actually started out that way.
No, it didn't. Actually, I have found some journal entries from 30 years ago, believe it or not, on a piece of paper in pencil.
That is amazing.
That's still legible.
Yeah.
I was asked at the time why I joined the Antarctic expedition, the first team of women to ski to the South Pole in 1993. And
30 years. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, it's hard to look back, Deborah.
Yeah. Hard, but gratifying, but yeah.
Gratifying. And
Yeah.
one of the questions back then was why did I want to join the expedition, not just from a personal, emotional, physical level. But I wrote down even back then that I felt the Antarctic deserved to have a place on center stage,
Huh.
because of how important it was as a continent that was changing because of our climate impacts. I wrote that 30 years ago, and I didn't realize it back then, but I have grown up with stories of the early polar explorers. So the Antarctic as a continent's always fascinated me.
Well, that really surprises me actually, because of course we have known since for even long before that that the ice has been melting, that there's been changes to the Arctic, the Antarctic, and everything in between. But it seems to show up there, and we'll talk about that at rates that exceed the rest of the planet in terms of warming and so forth. So it's almost as though someone's whispering in your ear, as of maybe from some ancestor or something that spoke to you. But what's kind of interesting, just as a quick aside, is that I have not visited those regions, but I have always had, I found an article of like 35, 40 years ago that I saved for a trip I wanted to take to see the Inuit and the northern reaches of
Mhm.
Canada on an icebreaker. There was a trip, and I always have had that in my head and studied and read books about it. No idea why, being Irish and from Colorado. So sometimes we don't know where these things are whispering into our ear from. It just is sort of an inside voice. So you have followed that voice very strongly. So if you don't mind, I'd like to start like right now and then go back and talk about maybe what these last 30 years and all your adventures and your work.
Mm.
But right now, in just 4 weeks, you are heading on a new mission, which is really the thing that's how I learned about you.
Mhm.
It's called By the North, For the North. Is that how
Yes.
you're referring to it?
Yes.
All right, so let's just start with maybe you could describe what your work is going to be, and maybe introduce your partner in Hearts in the Ice.
Right. Thank you for
Well,
that.
actually, I'm going to interrupt my own self. I didn't introduce Hearts in the Ice, so why don't we maybe start with your organization and the mission, and then this is a mission, a project of Hearts in the Ice.
Right. Thank you. So Hearts in the Ice was born in 2017. It is myself and Hilde Fålun Strøm, a woman who lives up in Svalbard. And we're both going to an adventure travel conference in Alaska. We met there and found that we had a sort of polar opposite lives. I've spent
Quite literally.
very literally here,
Very literally.
and we discovered that she spent about 2+ decades in the Arctic and myself 2+ in the Antarctic on and off. And we, neither one of us are in our 30s anymore. And we both burn to share our experiences with others through adventure travel, through presentations, through our writing. And we both kind of sat down at one point over lunch in Oslo, actually. And I remember the mushroom soup very well and the day. And we both she had an opportunity to use a cabin in the Arctic. And I, we went back and forth with what could this base camp be used for? And so we decided to actually quit our full-time jobs. We both have had very senior positions in the expedition cruise industry, and quit our full-time jobs to start Hearts in the Ice, which is a global platform for social impact, dialogue, inspiration, and education around climate change.
Huh.
That was our mission. And we had 3 different pillars of how we wanted to kind of grow Hearts in the Ice. And one was just using our experience in the polar regions, which is why we spent 19 months in a cabin, off-grid, remote, collecting data for scientists and creating story around the science that we were collecting data for, and connecting with youth. We connected with over 150,000 youth over the course of 19 months on a satellite phone. And we became examples of just basically what one person can do.
Absolutely.
And so we are now back from that expedition. The hardest part of coming back was reintegrating into a world of COVID, and a world where we're seeing more natural disasters reported in the media than ever before, primarily because of the escalation of the events and also just the media's, frenzy with putting those stories out there. And so we decided that we have a powerful platform and it's a global movement. How can we expand on what we're doing? And so our By the North, For the North project that you just referred to is our way of elevating our understanding of how important Indigenous wisdom and knowledge is in our understanding of how to treat the earth, how to treat each other, and how to move forward to bridge the gaps between Western science and the knowledge that they possess, and they're often underrepresented. So we are starting in Cambridge Bay, and this is just a location that we picked for logistical reasons. And we're working with a group of elders there they will share 4 in the field survival workshops with 10 youth every season, spring, summer, fall, and winter. And they will teach the youth how to build tools, how to navigate, how to hunt, how to harvest, how to fish, and how to live off the land in a way that is being lost.
Before you continue, because that was a lot of information, and we will go back and talk about your time up in that trapper's cabin and the work that you did, because it's very relevant and informs this current project that you're doing so perfectly. But can you explain where Cambridge Bay is and the people that you're going to be working with?
Yes, Cambridge Bay is in Nunavut, Canada. It's in the Canadian Arctic, and it is a community of probably 1,100 people that live there. It is a destination that if you were to travel on an expedition ship through the Northwest Passage or going, east-west, you would stop literally in Cambridge Bay. It's one of the destinations.
And these are Inuit people who are living. Is everyone there Inuit basically? I mean, this is a fully.
But basically, everyone that works there that's not in government is Indigenous. Yes, they're Inuit. And, we wanted to work with the government initially, and it was just too complicated.
Yeah.
And there was this notion of mistrust in what we were saying we were going to do and their perception of science. There's something called parachute science. Where the scientists fly in somewhere for several weeks, use the resources, which is local people, local knowledge, and then they leave, and the community has very little understanding of the findings, maybe because it's not translated in their traditional language. So we're going in as 2 neutral bodies. We are not scientists. We are citizen scientists, which I can elaborate on later, and we're 2 individuals that just really care. And we have our lives to dedicate this to. So, and that's our commitment.
So as you're working, you're going to be there for how long? How long is this project?
We're not going to be up there consistently. We'll be going up for different periods at a time throughout the seasons.
Okay. But are you going also as citizen scientists, or is that fully what you're going for? Because you mentioned this other teaching, the elders teaching the youth.
Yes, that's the second piece. So one piece of it is to record the transfer of, traditional knowledge to the youth. And the second will be Hearts in the Ice, introducing citizen science tools and projects to the youth in hopes that they will carry out probably 4 to 5 projects throughout a given year. And we will pay them. And they will become trained citizen scientists. And our goal is to help them understand what the science is telling us when you collect an ice core sample, why cloud observations and aurora observations matter, why recording, observations of polar bears, et cetera, et cetera. So it's us wanting to create some good narrative and some good story around how these 2 come together.
These 2 meaning the science and the Indigenous wisdom?
Correct.
Okay. So then how will you then, and you're also going to be on your part of this mission you're going to be collecting ice samples. You're going to be doing your own experiments as citizen scientists, as well as they are going to be doing their indigenous wisdom. So somehow these two are coming together. How will you share that combined or even into separate knowledge bases to the world?
Yeah, and that is, that's the piece that's sometimes so easy to define on paper, but this entire project, because we've been working on it for a year and a half, is going at the speed of trust.
Oh, I love that phrase, and I've never heard it before.
Yeah, and it just, it came to me one day because honestly, we're not here to save the world, Hilde and I, but we are here to say that the world needs saving. And it really does start with us as individuals. And this will answer your question, but it's personal because, if I look at myself as a woman and what I value, I want to stay in alignment with my values. I value equity and equality for all. I value the history of where I've come from. I value our natural world. And I think that I don't so much align with all the ways that we are growing as nations, which is up. And when I think of that, and I think of the term CEO, that means sort of leadership top down. And we have reframed what a CEO is to be climate engagement officer, leadership across all arms.
Yeah.
And so that being the case, to answer specifically your question, how we will share all of this, it will evolve. Our goal right now is to create some narrative and have some of that come from the locals in Cambridge Bay, whether it's small interviews with the youth, small interviews with the elders that are older and they won't be around that long. And they're very emotional about the potential loss of all the wisdom that they've harnessed over 6-7 decades.
Yeah,
and
it hasn't. Why is it gone? Why is it already not being shared with you?
Well, I think they are absolutely collecting the information, but there is this trust factor, and so for some reason, we've been given sort of a green light from one of the key elders in the community. His name is George, and he shared with us what it was like to be displaced and put in the residential schools in Canada, which is a very sore subject for the federal government, which they have, acknowledged. But when we think about the different populations around the world that are mostly marginalized, it is women who have been sort of the ones holding them up and advocating for infrastructure change, policy development, more funding, because we are good collaborators. So I think Hilde and I are coming at this from the heart, from the inside out, not the outside in.
Right.
And so there's some training that we're doing through something called OCAP, and I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's a way of really respecting the collection of knowledge and making sure that the entities that we're collecting knowledge from, in this case, Cambridge Bay residents, that they own it. It's not us who owns it.
So I'm a little confused on one point, which is just that, and this is going to be a sort of a common confusion, because we're talking about indigenous knowledge, but you were talking about things like, how some of the survival techniques, right? Like about collecting food or things. I remember you mentioned some things right at the beginning, the kinds of knowledge they're going to be sharing. They weren't necessarily about the climate, right? I mean, they were just general indigenous knowledge that they want preserved.
Right.
Is the focus on climate for you and Hilde, or is it just bigger than that?
It's bigger than that.
Yeah. Okay.
And so you bring up a very good point. Thank you. And, one of the things, and I've been doing copious amounts of reading and just feeling around what is it that those that live with the land can share that is different from maybe my experience growing up. And there are three things that come screaming out at me, and one is respect for all living beings.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're going to share with the youth hunting and fishing, it's not just about hunting and fishing.
Got it.
You know, it's really about how in their practices, and that would be the second one, how in their sustainable practices they live in harmony with the land.
Mm-hmm.
They're not hunting for the sake of taking and selling for a commercial aspect. It's really, they need it to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third would be for me, the very holistic approach to health. That they, you know, those that live in harmony with the land, and there are thousands of populations around the world that are continuing to live in greater harmony with our natural world. They have a lot to teach us Western people, of which I'll call myself, about how we approach our food, how we approach treating each other, how we approach community, how we approach success, how we approach our own values. And I think these, you know, at the end of the day, we don't want people to go back and live in teepees, right? Or in igloos, but we do need people to understand that we are living in a way that's not sustainable. We are taking far more from each other and from everything than we really need. And I think part of this transfer of knowledge between the elders and the youth will be, I think, a greater awareness around this connectivity, this holistic approach to the whole picture, how even the youth treat each other. There's a lot of bullying going on. There's a lot of suicide. Social media comes into the picture. So there are some big problems to unpack. So I hope that helps share a little bit about.
No, it helps so much. And it's, I think what my brain keeps doing as you're explaining is thinking, this is, as you mentioned, Indigenous knowledge, which is ancient, is happening and still in existence and still informing communities in all, you know, in the Amazon and in the islands in the Southeast Pacific that are facing existential crisis, that having to leave their islands due to climate change. Everywhere where there are Indigenous people still not too integrated into the Western society, we have so much to learn from. And that knowledge is so important. And so the more that, even if your project did nothing more, which is going to do a lot more than that, but if all it did was highlight the importance of holding on to that knowledge about how we all, you know, the connectivity between everything in life and to how we can't lose that knowledge of how to be that way. That would be such a worthwhile project if that was all accomplished. So
yeah, thank you, Deborah. And you bring up a really good point for me right now, and that is, it sounds kind of complicated, our project, which I think it is. We're not making any money off this. We have some support from organizations like oneearth.org, of which we're extremely grateful.
I didn't know that. Interesting.
Yes. And we also have support from different women's organizations around the world, including Wings World Quest. They're based in New York. They're all about, supporting women in science and young and older. And that is important, but I'm still learning. I'm still learning so much. And if you permit me, there is a woman in Montreal. Her name is Sila Watt-Cloutier, and she wrote a book called The Right to Be Cold. It's a great read, and she is someone that I've come to know, and we've hosted her on one of our school calls, and she shared a quote, and I want to share it with you right now because I put this aside because I thought if there's a time with Deborah to share it, because it's very interesting. It's from a man called James Speth. He's an American environmental lawyer and advocate. And he shared this. I used to think that top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address those problems. But I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with those, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that.
Wow. Wow.
You
It's
know,
just so, yeah.
it's very powerful, and it's illuminating the underpinning societal values and
Mm-hmm.
um, that we're faced with, and that
Mm-hmm.
we really do need a sort of a revolution, and that's a big
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I can just be one example of sharing what you mentioned, and that is illuminating those that are what we call climate resilient. They have been living with change for decades. Their adaptation is far more evolved
Mm-hmm.
than for us if we were being displaced suddenly, because we have all the modern comforts of home.
Mm-hmm.
And we can learn a lot from that. I think that
That knowledge is going to become more valuable maybe than we knew it was going to be, whether it's surviving in the heat or surviving in the cold, or
right.
whatever we're facing, which seems to be quite a few things we're facing. That's fascinating because it really shifts the onus from these arguments. I couldn't even believe last week I was in yet another, I backed out quickly, but yet in another discussion of, was climate change real? And I gave up those discussions a long time ago, but was surprised to be so heavily confronted with that once again. And I'm realizing that, as I explained to these gentlemen that I was with, that, this is not a red blue issue. This is not, this is this, I know you want to go and argue all the points. We have to go beyond that. And at the end of the conversation, we did, because it's like, this should not be a political conversation. This is a human conversation. This is a
Oh,
all life conversation. You know what? At the end, their relatives, who I never see, every 10 years or so, they both hugged me. They both hugged me. Usually we leave screaming, and not to say goodbye, even just to say thank you. I think bringing that humanity back into the conversation, and I don't want to restrict it to humans, bringing all of life back into this, just the way you just described, that was really powerful,
well, and
that quote.
you hit a very important point just now, Deborah, and that is the human issue is, as we've come back from Bumsaboo for 2 years now. Bumsaboo is the name of that trapper's cabin we
Now
lived
I know
in.
how to pronounce it. I love
Yeah,
it. It sounds better when you say it. Okay.
Bumsaboo, it means little
Yeah.
bear hut.
Oh.
Is we have taken classes, we have gotten coached from different leaders at the Jane Goodall Institute, Polar Bears International.
Hmm.
We have been trying to sit with scientists and other people who have been studying this far longer than we have, to ask the question, why is it people are still questioning the
Hmm.
fact that climate change is real or not?
Mm-hmm.
And when we left for our experience, we asked one of the key people at the World Ocean Observatory, Peter Neal, why are there still climate deniers out there? And he shared with us that it's so much easier to deny it than to acknowledge it, because
Mm.
if you acknowledge that it's real, it means that on some emotional level you have to take responsibility for it. And when you
Oh,
take responsibility for it, you feel a little pressure to change. And I think most people don't know how to do that.
I see. One of the other thoughts I've been, actually, there's a quote in your book. So we haven't even talked about your book yet, and we'll get there. But I will just say it's called also Hearts in the Ice. I'd hold it up, but I read it on Kindle, so I can only hold up my iPad. It is a fantastic book. I'm going to put links to everything we talk about in the show notes, because I know people are going to want to go do some further reading and learning. But this book, well, the full title, The Adventure, Hearts in the Ice, The Adventures of the First Two Women to Overwinter Solo in Svalbard. Do I pronounce Svalbard correct?
Yes, perfectly.
Which I want you to talk about that next, because I think it's helpful also to this conversation, obviously. But you talked about, like, and they say, what would it look like if the world actually decided to take on the climate crisis? It would look like what it did during the pandemic, 24/7 news headlines, experts talking about the number of deaths that day. I mean, we look at all these things that are happening around us. We're not reporting those as climate change deaths, and
Mm-hmm.
because people argue about it, but just that would be the headlines, and I know that people have said this for years. Why is this not in the headlines every day? This is our existential crisis. And it reminded me of when, I'll definitely reveal my age by this, but in the 70s, when we had this oil embargo.
Mhm.
And I'm sure a lot of people that are in their 60s at least will know that. Remember the long lines we had to wait in for gas. And I don't even remember the politics of the situation, but we couldn't get enough oil. We couldn't get enough gas. And as a child, I just remember the long lines of people waiting to get gas. But what I also remember is that the buildings downtown were all browned out. We were having a voluntary brownout. And I have thought for 20, 30 years now, why aren't we doing this with the climate crisis? I can use less of this, that, and the other thing. Why doesn't somebody ask me to do it? We're being actually asked the opposite. We're being asked to buy more, especially during COVID as it came out. Buy more, buy more, buy more. Here's some money, buy more. Here's a tax refund, buy more. The opposite of what we need to do. And that is almost a climate denying, not just by individuals, but by countries, by governments. That's
Absolutely.
confusing to me and to you, obviously. You wrote this in the book.
Yeah,
What?
it's very troubling too on so many levels, because without local leadership, uh, built out,
Yeah.
we won't see change, because it does need to come from leaderships. But we're
Mm-hmm.
seeing now so many more women coming to the forefront of climate activism, which has been the case for decades, but maybe we just see more of it now. And there's such a deep commitment to a sustainable future from women's organizations like One Earth and etc.
And Daughters for the Earth, which is how I
And
found you.
Daughters for the Earth, which is
Yeah.
under One Earth. And it's it's really interesting to me how innately we as women, we are caretakers,
Mm-hmm.
we are collaborators, we're
Mm-hmm.
networkers. We can also hold each other up in our own success and not be competitive,
Challenged by it. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so it's interesting how our project became a very powerful model for how maybe change can be created. And it boils down to something very simple. One person at a time.
Mm.
One idea at a time. Citizen science, which is what we did. I loved science growing up, but it wasn't my area of expertise.
Mm-hmm.
And so to be even somebody who could collect data for science, to understand it and unpack it, it's really powerful and it's quite motivating.
I bet.
Yeah.
I bet. Maybe why don't we talk about that now then? Because some people are aware of what a citizen scientist is, but I think maybe most are not.
Yeah. Yeah. Citizen science has been around for decades. And it's a way of collecting data for ongoing scientific research projects around the world.
Mm-hmm.
That can help elevate both the public's understanding and the scientists' understanding of trends and over a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and there are so many different platforms that you could pick: a SciStarter, Happy Whale, Zooniverse, iNaturalist, Earthwatch. And Hilde and I were first introduced to citizen science, which is citizens like you and I collecting data for the scientists.
Right.
We were first both introduced to citizen science as words, and also in action on board expedition cruise ships.
Yeah, I was surprised to read that actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, of course, on a commercial aspect, they're trying to find ways to create value for guests traveling to remote regions.
Yeah.
But
like
at the end of the day,
ecotourism in a word, right?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That started with Earthwatch in the 70s, if I'm not mistaken. And we're coming back to that trend now where this is something to engage people. It is, you just need to ask yourself, what are you passionate about? And then if it's birds, if it's worms, if it's clouds, or if it's climate change or wildlife, and then find a citizen science project to align with. And then you create, it could be observations, photos, or written documentation. And this goes into an open data bank. So the public has access to the information. That's the difference.
Yeah. See, I wasn't aware of that so maybe a good example would be to explain what you were doing in Svalbard. And first of all, let's, so if we can just shift to that story and then talk about I think you had 5 or 6 or 7 projects just that you were working on up there as citizen scientists. So I want to just set the stage a little bit for what you did. So you met Hilde in 2017.
Right.
You decided to join forces and then decided to overwinter in this most remote area, a tiny and remote area in the in Norway. But it's an island. It's archipelago, right?
It is an archipelago, and
archipelago.
Yes, you are so right. So we met in 2017. In 2018, we officially started Hearts in the Ice. That's when we both quit our jobs. And that was not an easy thing, I have to say.
I bet. That's a challenge.
You know, it's sort of like, who was it that Henry Ford said? No, it was Martin Luther King. Sorry. He said, if you don't.
You're a little different.
Sorry, mixing quotes in my head. If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything.
Oh, I do. I love that one. Yes.
Yeah. And I just, we had the ability to use this cabin. It's 140 kilometers, 87 miles away from town, way out there.
I would think it would be available most of the time. I'm not surprised you were able to use it.
Well, nobody has ever lived there more than like 2 weeks. It was built for beluga hunting in the 30s.
Okay.
And so it's really rustic. No running water, no electricity. We had to bring solar and wind. And it was basically chop wood, carry water existence. And we collected data for, it was 8 international science projects. And it was us picking up the telephone and calling, for example, Alison Cusick from Scripps Institute of Oceanography in La Jolla, who was doing a phytoplankton study in the Antarctic. And we knew this because of the ships. And we said, Alison, we are going to be in one place for 9 months. Could we be of service and value to your project?
I see.
That's how it started.
That's so interesting.
She said, well, let me think about that. You know, one thing that we don't have data on is phytoplankton in the polar night.
Mm-hmm.
So we had 3 months.
Polar night meaning months. A long night.
3 months of darkness. Yeah. And so we went out. It was not an easy thing. It's very time consuming. It's dangerous in the dark because of the polar bears. We had over 100 polar bear encounters during our stay. They were around the cabin all the time. So we collected phytoplankton by going in a kayak and dragging a net behind us or in our boat.
Okay.
And had to store those samples.
So just collecting water and seeing how many phytoplankton are in them, or what? Or you're just storing it?
I'll walk you through it because I take it for granted. So we're pulling a net behind us, and it's got a water bottle, kind of like this, attached to the bottom of the net. And so we pull it for 15 minutes, and then we go back to shore and bring that water inside our cabin, and we filter it. And we have very special filters that we have to use, sterilized gloves and tweezers, put the filter in the filtering system, filter the water. And then that little filter, which is a very small disc, gets rolled up like a burrito and put into a tiny little test tube. And on there, we mark Bumsaboo and we mark the date and the time.
Very scientific.
It's, you have to follow the protocol.
Right. That's where they had to trust you.
Yes.
Yeah. And was it the quality? Was it the amount of phytoplankton that they were looking for? Or did you even know exactly?
Yeah, she's still, oddly enough, processing because of COVID. She couldn't get in the lab. So that's one of the projects that she's still processing. But she said, we have collected a lot of what she's calling them phyto babies. Because she's so into these little tiny microorganisms that we think the forest is responsible for most of the oxygen in our atmosphere. It's actually phytoplankton.
Yeah. Yeah. And very few people are aware of the importance of phytoplankton. And it's the one thing I just wish that there was a little more focus put on, because it's our oxygen. And we're
and what they're worried about in the Arctic and the Antarctic is, with this melting going on of fresh water in the salt water, the phytoplankton thrive in very dense salt water. So if
Mm.
you're pouring fresh water in there, you're diluting the
Mm.
concentration
Mm.
and the ability for the phytoplankton to rebloom.
Wow.
Mm.
Okay. Wow.
So that was just
Okay.
one of the 8
Yeah.
projects.
And okay, this is more on the survival thing because we're having to skip through so many really big stories because every single one of these stories could take hours. And I think all we can really hope to do is to point people in directions where they can read more about it. But I do have one question because as I saw whether you were in the Antarctica or you were in the Arctic, um, being in a kayak seems like the most polar bears, forget it, that's, we know that they're the most deadly and they're monstrous. There were some as big as your cabin,
Yeah.
which 1,300 pounds, I believe. I don't know how two rather small women were dealing with all that. It just speaks so much to your fortitude, strength, stamina, courage, everything else. But as scary as a
Yeah,
good,
that
I'm sure you had some sleepless nights with a polar bear right outside your door. But I really want to know about this one topic of being in a kayak in the Arctic, broken up ice all around, or the Antarctic. How is that safe? You fall over, you're dead, right? Isn't that true?
yeah, that's pretty true, Deborah. It's an interesting thing, this notion of the magnitude of the risk that we took to be there.
Yeah.
Not only did we cut off all our ties to our world, our family, our relationships, our friends, um, there we are in this place with those real dangers right outside the door and maybe inside the cabin that, um, to our credit, and I think that Hilde and I are pretty remarkable women in this regard. We had a deep respect for each other and
Mm.
still do. And
Mm-hmm.
we also had a very and this goes way deep. This is talking about maybe in some odd way we were predisposed to do this, and that everything in my life up until that point made it such that I was ready to
Mm.
actually embark on this rather um, very different way of kind of standing up for what I believe in and
Oh.
illuminating the importance of the natural world, because it's been my teacher for decades,
Mm-hmm.
uh, including books, obviously, but just the wilderness is the great teacher. And so, if I've learned anything, it's over the years. It is the second we walk out the door to go into those kayaks, we have walked through in our mind, without talking about it, every single worst case scenario you could possibly imagine, and we
Wow.
prepare for it.
Okay. Well,
Because taking risks, which that is, and I think there's a lot that we can share about taking risks with people, because we're living in a world where fundamentally taking risks is part of our DNA as people, and we've
yeah.
gotten away from taking those natural risks. We don't have to hunt and gather anymore.
Yeah. But it's the reason why people go out and mountain climb and take
Right.
risks because it's like you say, it's in our DNA. So
That's
we
right.
made our world so safe that now we have to go looking for things to live that life that really
We're
is part of
curious
us.
and we want to
Yeah.
grow and we want to achieve things and we learn
Mm-hmm.
from our failures, and yeah,
Yeah.
it's survival and adaptation. We learn,
Mm-hmm.
I think so much of what we were doing up in the Arctic for 19 months was, um,
19 months. I didn't
19
know it
months
was that
over.
long. For some reason, I thought it was 9 months. But was it originally 9 months
It was
and then
originally 9,
COVID?
and then COVID happened, and
That added. Okay.
we both went home. I went back to Canada and she stayed
Oh.
in Svalbard, and we had to reach
But
out
in
to
a
our,
city in Svalbard, not in the cabin. Yeah.
no, in the
Yeah.
city in
Yeah.
Longyearbyen.
Yeah.
And we asked ourselves, where are we most valuable? And it seemed like we were most valuable going back there. So we did. And it
I
was a
must.
kind of a tough thing.
I did see that you left and went back, but I didn't know that you went all the way back to Canada. I was I was probably speed reading a little bit through parts of it because I like to go back and take my time with that because I know there were so many valuable lessons in that book for everyone that will never do anything like that. There were just a lot of lessons about relationships, how to live with another person, not your partner, not even, just like another person in a cabin for 19 months with 3-month-long winters, no light, with polar bears. I mean, and the isolation, I know people have asked you about this. You talk about how people say, how did you bear that isolation? And I think too, for me, that was one of the questions that I did want to ask you, is the isolation. You said one time in there that you were closer to outer space really than any other people. You were so far. It's hard for people to show, it's great to go on Google Earth and look up where this is, because it's kind of the only way to really get the feel of how far you were from everything.
You're right.
The only other person I heard describing this was, do you know, I'm sure you probably know who Dame Ellen MacArthur is, and she started the MacArthur Institute. She wrote about sailing around the world. I think she was in the Southern Ocean, and she was all alone in the ocean, and I think the closest place was the International Space Station. She said the closest people to her in the world were on the International Space Station. That strikes so much fear in me, more than any of the other things that you've been through and talked about. How do you manage that kind of a thought?
Oh boy.
For 19 months.
It's such a big topic and question.
Yeah, I know.
And it's a real one. I look at the evolution of who I was when I first got there. It was about all the practicalities of cooking, making sure we had enough water, making sure we had enough heat inside the cabin, making sure we were collecting data, making sure we had our school calls scheduled, that we were, ready to do that, because we had quite a few obligations. And then when you get in that rhythm, and this is maybe now we're a month in, I just remember facing myself. And what that means is there's nowhere to hide. I can't hide behind noise, because there is none. I can't hide behind, shopping, because there are no stores. I can't hide behind a conversation with a friend, because nobody else is there except Hilde. So what comes screaming forward, and this is probably the thing that does horrify most people and did for me, is who is the Sunniva that's buried deep in there?
Oh, yeah.
Right? And she was 5 years old. And you kind of look at that and you go, wow, I have these habits and behaviors and ways of reacting to something that maybe I need to work on. Because now I have a mirror of this other person that's around me 24/7. And so it really illuminates the things about you that you love. I can do this, I can do that. And the things about you on an internal level that you really don't like. And so Hilde and I had an opportunity, because we did have some outside coaching on how to deal with and cope with the isolation with just the two of us, how to stop each other so we didn't jump on the arguing train, because it's so easy if someone, and you mentioned early on in the conversation, just dealing with the climate deniers out there. And then at the end, it turned into a hug, right? How do you hold space for people who disagree with you? And this does have to do with the whole climate conversation. And for us up there and now down here, it is, we need to be honest enough with ourselves to hold space with our heart and do deep listening for the other person and the other perspective and the other viewpoint. And then kind of reiterate and acknowledge what you just heard, and then find a way to share some value that you might have that's aligned with the other person. Well, I know you really care about doing this well, and so do I. We just had different ways of doing it.
Wow, that's so adult of you.
Well, you know what?
I mean, it's bigger than adult. Obviously, it's very evolved, and you evolved.
It's hard work.
Yeah.
It's really hard work. And so what I'm learning now, it doesn't matter if I'm talking to a CEO of a company or if I'm talking to the kids. what's really important is to look at what we value what I value as a human being, as a woman, and make sure that I am treating other people with that same sort of respect and holding space. And that's how the conversations start. That's how we solve climate change, is we hold space for each other. We listen to each other. And we find a way to find some commonality between what we value. We educate ourselves on things going on. We stand up for policy change in our local communities, and we advocate for a green energy shift.
Wow.
We have to break it down somehow. Sorry, I went all over the map with that.
No, actually you didn't. It was very focused, and what's so surprising to me about it is that when I asked you about what it was like to be so isolated, you went internal, and I was picturing external. I'm thinking how scary to have no one else around and no one to come and help you if you cut your leg with the axe or something like that. That's where my head was. But what was difficult for you was that inside the cabin, when you're safe with one other person, that's where the work was.
Well, Deborah, and I will share something with you right now, because I think how you understand the isolation is how maybe a lot of people would understand it, the outside physical dangers. We had those pretty well managed, although they were very real and present every day. But, we didn't have TV. We had nothing to tell us that we should be at size 0, that we should be eating this or eating that.
Yeah.
Or how we should feel or what we should think.
Interesting. Yeah.
For one of the first times in my life, I had original thought.
Whoa.
And that is a big whoa, because it came from the inside. And if we don't listen to all those outside external pressures that often come sadly from the media and commercials, you know what? Hilde and I discovered our strengths and our problem-solving abilities because we had to.
When you came back, did you hold on to that knowledge?
It's living, it's burning inside me, which is probably why I struggle a little bit being back home.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, I am not needed here.
Oh, kind of like a soldier coming back from war.
Right? It's really an interesting conundrum. But which is why
you are. You are.
Yeah.
I mean, I've learned more in this conversation than many I've had in a very long time, maybe ever, because what we think is the problem is not the problem, and that's what I've learned from you in this conversation. I mean, it's like we know it in at some level. But when you strip everything away, climate change isn't the problem. We're not listening to each other is the problem.
Yeah.
And we're not hearing ourselves is the problem. And and it's ironic, because in the same conversation that I just mentioned with these 2 men last week, I say men, I could say my ex-brother, anyway, they all of a sudden I was having one of those out-of-body experiences where I looked down and I told them, I'm like, this is not my opinion versus your opinion. We are both like puppets on like marionettes being told what to, and I could see, because they'd go from COVID to trans rights to climate change. It started with to all these things. Like there was like someone handed them a menu. Well, if you think that about this, you must. It was just like we are split on this same criteria between red and blue in this country and around the world, and other, they don't call it red and blue, but whatever. And the whole thing is that we're not listening to our own inside voices, and then to the inside voices of those with whom we speak. And that's what it feels like. This is the kernel of it all.
That's right. And just to go back to the title of your podcast, How We Change the World, it's climate change is not a spectator sport. It really is an inside job, and there's no one size fits all for how to solve it. But I think that and I'm trying to do better every day. Just the thing that I have to be very careful about, and I think that a lot of my friends and family fall into this category, is not be paralyzed with the enormity of this problem, because it's huge. But if we can, a smile, I found that a smile travels a long way in the cold Arctic. And,
you have so many great sayings. That are
so does a hug, and if we can just, we need to treat each other with just kindness and care and respect. And, for people out there that don't know what to do, support podcasts like yours, support organizations like Hearts in the Ice, because we're out there burning to do this, because I have been the recipient of all of the gifts that the natural world has offered. And so it's one way for me to sort of illuminate how important the biodiversity of our species is, and how important diversity of people is. Diversity
of people. Yeah. We're so close to almost to the end of our hour, and there's so many things I had more questions about that we can't really we don't have time to go deeply into, but your expedition to the South Pole, I think, is important. It was 30 years ago, and you learned a lot on that I think led to Svalbard. I know I don't still don't say Svalbard. I'm saying completely wrong, and I'm going to try again.
You got it.
But you were on this women's South Pole expedition. You were among the first you were one of 4 women to physically get to the South Pole under your own propulsion, right? Pulling on skis, pulling a 200-pound sled. That was 30 years ago, right?
Yeah. Yes.
You weren't really mentally quite there yet, were you?
No.
You had a breakdown after at one point you were sick. It was this, and I think this is just one leg of this 5-year journey, which I hadn't put that all together before. This is the journey that took you to the South Pole on the
That's
last.
Right.
Is this the last journey, the last leg of the journey, or was it?
No, the South Pole expedition was in 1992-93, and it was 67 days.
Yeah, so that started the whole long. Okay.
Yeah, that started my foray into the world of polar expeditioning.
Mm-hmm.
But that was that trip was the brainchild of a woman who lives in Minnesota, Anne Bancroft, not the actress. And she was a teacher. And so we had 5 goals for that expedition, and we fulfilled all of them. There's so little research on women's bodies and minds in extreme environments. So that was one aspect of the research. But let me know if there's any part of that trip that you wanted me to focus on specifically.
Well, first of all, just that I hate to jump to the end of it, but as you mentioned, 67 days. You slept in tents, obviously, just going across this area that is, I think 67, no, that's the number of days, 60 degrees in below zero.
Yes.
It's hard for me to even say that. Like, I don't know how you survive. At one point, though, and you were sick a good portion of that time with bronchitis, you had a sort of a spiritual, I guess you might say, saving at the end. You finally broke down, cried for 3 days. You're very stoic. That's not what you do. But it became bigger than you, right? What you were surviving.
Yes.
What helped you, and is that something that you have pulled forward onto these other expeditions?
Yeah, it's thank you.
It's a big question to jump into.
Your memory serves you very well there, because you hit the nail on the head. I was very, very sick. I was 30 years old when I went, and my upbringing as a Norwegian, was that Norwegians, you can do it. You have to do it yourself. You have to manage on your own. There's a certain stoicism that goes along with that. So I knew that I wouldn't give up. If I had one thing going for me, it was that. And it's like, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Right. And so I knew I wouldn't give up. But that serves you well, and also is not a very good thing, because at some point we need to stop because maybe we're risking too much of our own physical body, or you go so far away you'll never come back.
Yeah.
And what really helped me was understanding that the only thing I had control over, and it's a really strange thing to say because you always hear how powerful your thoughts are,
Yeah.
and you hear that.
Yeah. In a good way and in a bad way.
But it's like, what does it really mean? Like when you're down and you're depressed and you're struggling, what does it actually mean to people? And what it meant to me at that time of real, and it was a spiritual transformation. And I cried for 3 days straight with my glacier glasses on. And I cried the loss of who I thought I was.
Wow, really?
Yeah, I did.
Huh.
And then what happened was I wanted to just sort of be open to accept help, which is wasn't in my DNA.
Yeah.
And what I thought strength was, I thought strength was being able to, carry a 200-pound sled or scale the top of Everest. And wrong.
That is part of the strength, though. That's not nothing.
That's physical.
That's a certain
strength.
kind of strength, right?
But success for me was, I guess it was redefining success, maybe not strength. And success was redefining what strength meant. And that it was really my willingness to accept help. And that was a tough one for me. But when I did come to that realization, I was able to see things differently, and I became an asset to the team.
Oh my goodness. When you say accept help, did you mean spiritual help or did you mean physical help from the other women?
Both.
Okay.
I am
interesting. Yeah.
If something is up there, send me a sign because I am feeling like, oh, woe is me.
Okay.
And so when I think about that, one thought at a time, I literally had mantras in my head that I had to repeat over and over again to keep myself going so that I could get through this space I was in.
Yeah. And that has stayed with you. That did very much. You couldn't have been in that cabin for that many months with another person without having. And hopefully this all comes to play in your relationships day to day as well, right? Just between friends and family and just,
I hope so. I
maybe
think
it's less obvious, but.
Well, what's interesting about the South Pole and the Arctic is just how important it is to understand that you're not alone. We were physically alone up there, just the two of us, but if we can step out of our heads and understand that we're living in a world that is absolutely remarkable. We have trees and wildlife and beauty just
everywhere,
outside our door if we're lucky. And we have to find a connection to that. And I had 19 months, Deborah, up in the Arctic to feel that deep connection because we were closer to the lowest band of the aurora.
Oh, that's the other thing,
than we were to town. And if I didn't have the ability inside me to feel cracked open, wide open by all that, then I shouldn't have been there.
Yeah. My goodness. You're a great storyteller. You're a great writer. And I think that's really what helps us all learn from what you have to teach. It's not, and this is where scientists kind of aren't able to do that typically. They're not able to convert that into story and to share it. And that is really a gift that you have. And I'm excited to speak with Hilde also. I'm sure she has a completely different perspective, but
she will have a different perspective.
Yeah,
and it will be the
very
shared
fun
experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, we would both share with everybody that, as people, we matter so much more than we think we do. And that is the title of a book, You Matter More Than You Think, by a woman in Norway. And it's a great read. And it's a good reminder that, we all have a role to play. We all have a responsibility. And it could be something that brings us deep joy and deep meaning and deep purpose. We just have to find out what that is.
Thank you so much. I know you're leaving in 4 weeks. Is there a way that we can support you, or that, and is this something that we can hear from you while you're up there? Will you be doing any kind of a Zoom or
we will.
anything?
We actually postponed the date, so we'll be going at the end of October.
Oh, okay.
and I'm going to the Arctic next week,
Oh,
back up to Svalbard, and we're hosting
oh,
a sort of a climate leadership summit on board a ship for 4 days. So
oh
maybe
my
you can join
goodness.
us next year.
I'm going into pack right now.
Okay.
That would be a dream come true. Absolutely. So,
We'll
well,
stay in touch.
I'll put the links in for your website though, because I know you do kind of make
Yep. And on our
connections there, and
social
you
media
have a,
feeds, we
yeah,
have Instagram and Facebook,
yeah,
Hearts in the Ice. And
yeah.
we would love people to support and follow and hopefully get a little inspiration from what we're
Great.
doing. So
I
thank you,
am so
Deborah.
excited. Thank you. This has been so joyful and educational. So thanks for that.
Thank
Good
you.
luck in all your projects, and we will stay in touch.
Okay.
All right. Take care.